Greetings all, Ferrari-Man601 here. Welcome back to another 1/400 scale diecast model aircraft review of this, by Gemini Jets, the Boeing 707. The 707 is one of those aircraft that needs no introduction. It was the first jet airliner produced by Boeing, and it revolutionized air transport and commercial air travel. The first jet produced by Boeing was probably the best one that they ever did in terms of getting a design absolutely right the first time. The 707 introduced a wide scope of design concepts and execution on those concepts that still hold true today, 60 years basically after it first flew. The first flight of the Boeing 707 was on December 20th, 1957, so back in the 1950s, barely 10 years removed from the end of the Second World War, when jet technology was just barely in its infancy. Now we're strapping 4 jet engines onto an airliner and we're sending it across the oceans with hundreds of people on board. Technology absolutely exploded in the closing stages of World War II, and it continued all the way through the end of the 20th century. And Boeing absolutely taking advantage of all of these newfound ways to do things and really capitalizing on it in terms of producing one of the best airliners ever to be produced. First flying on December 20th, 1957, introduced into commercial service on October 26, 1958 with Pan American World Airways. That's Pan Am. 865 707s of all variants were produced between 1956 and 1978. Some military variants continued production all the way up into the early 90s. However, the primary civilian users of the aircraft were Pan Am, Trans World Airlines, American Airlines, and Air France, although, as we see this 707 here in El Al colors, the official airline of the State of Israel, obviously there were some other customers as well. The last customers for the 707 in its commercial variant, Saha Air in Iran, and they only retired their 707 somewhat recently. So today, none are still in regular commercial service, but there are still a few privately owned and chartered 707s that are still flying, in addition to several military variants of the 707, such as the Boeing C-137 Stratoliner, the E-3 Sentry, the E-6 Mercury, the KC-135, and the Northrop Grumman E-8 Joint Stars aircraft. So 707 no longer in commercial service today, but some limited cargo and charter and private operations still available here, with the 707 being basically 60 years old. That is an absolutely remarkable achievement for any aircraft design, nonetheless a 4-engine civil jet airliner. Let's take a look at what Gemini Jets have given us here in this 2001 release of their 1/400 scale Boeing 707. Before we take a closer look at this now basically vintage Gemini Jets rendition of the Boeing 707, let's take a look at the box in which it comes. Well, you'll notice immediately that this box is quite the departure from the Gemini Jets boxes that we see nowadays. Have a look at this. Mostly silver, completely different fonts, and completely different cover art as well. You can see the model itself is actually photographed rather than there being some sort of computer-generated rendering of the aircraft. That is an actual photo of the model there against a generic sky backdrop. But otherwise, you can see that we have a lot of the same information that we have currently on these Gemini Jets boxes, but this one is entitled Limited Edition, as you can see there in that cursive script, and then diecast model, 1/400 scale, as you would expect to see. Boeing 707, and then of course El Al, as this one is in El Al colors. Historical Retro Jets livery. So this model was made in 2001. So the model itself is 19 years old now, and they label it then as a Retro Jets livery. So you really get a sense of how old this El Al livery actually is. However, the slogan, made for collectors by collectors, still there. The Gemini Jets trade logo unchanged in the modern era. Produced under license from the Boeing Management Company. 707 are among the trademarks owned by Boeing. That disclaimer also identical to what we see on other Gemini Jets boxes in more recent times. Bottom panel of the box, there you go. Gemini Jets, 1/400 scale die-cast model. And then the same selling points as you get today. The reiteration of the logo, and then the registration number for X-Ray Alpha Tango Sierra. One of the side panels, this is quite similar to what we see nowadays, Gemini Jets. Another photograph of the model rather than a computer rendering. El Al, Boeing 707, and there's your item number, GJELY186. Top panel, there you go. Gemini Jets, trademark, and then adult collectible model. Warning, contains small parts not suitable for children under 8 years. Now they're saying children under 14 years. I wonder if there were any changes with laws regarding small parts and product labeling in that intervening time. But 8-year-olds apparently cannot have this. Interesting. Our side panel again. And then our top, as you can see, Look Inside tab is still there and in the same place and still modeled identically. The back, here we go. We start to get some more specs on the model on the back. Same picture from the front, but downsized a bit, as real as it gets. And then all of the selling points again. Notice no social media links because copyright 2001 Gemini Jets, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. So social media really wasn't a thing yet. Very cool. And then we start to get our specs on the model here. Aircraft type is the Boeing 707-358B. Livery is El Al with no space between L and Al for some reason. Construction number on this particular airframe 19502. Line number 551. Registration number is 4 X-Ray Alpha Tango Sierra. The engines on this one were the Pratt & Whitney JT3D-7s. Rollout date for this airframe was 19 December 1966. First flight date 23 January 1967. And a delivery date of 2 February 1967. We go into the Look Inside tab. What have we here? We have the Void, but we still have the As Real as It Gets detail there. That's a departure from the modern boxes. And then we get into the specs and our little write-up. Of course, we do have a reiteration of the specs that are on the back panel of the box, but here it is in very small typeface. It reads, the Boeing 707-320BC was the final passenger variant of the robust series of 707 aircraft. The original turbojet 707-100 first took to the skies on 20 December 1957. Over the coming years, the 707 went through several improvements, including the upgrading to fan jet power. The last passenger model 707 was delivered to the Romanian government, and that's aircraft number 938, in March of 1979, although military variants were manufactured as late as March of 1991. Many diplomats of the world have said that the Boeing 707 brought the world closer together as the world's first successful jet airliner. Cool. Then we start to get into the specifications of the 707-320B and C variants. Length 152 feet 11 inches, wingspan 145 feet 9 inches, height 42 feet 5 inches, empty weight 141,100 pounds, cruising speed 600 miles per hour, range 3,625 miles, and the seating 150 in a typical mixed class configuration. High density configurations can go as high as 200 per the box. So, bit of a departure from what we get in these Gemini Jets boxes nowadays, but still more or less you can see where the lineage comes from, at least in the box design, the box art, and of course the information written thereon. Some more detailed specifications here on the Boeing 707-320B and C variants, as this one is an example of. Well, in this era, this aircraft, of course, designed initially in the 1950s and it first flew in the 1950s, basically no computers whatsoever were there to assist flight crews in the operation or navigation of these airplanes. So you do have a minimum cockpit crew of 3. There are positions for a pilot, first officer, and flight engineer in the cockpit of the 707. And of course, all 3 of those guys would be working as a well-oiled machine to keep the aircraft in the air and going generally where it's supposed to be going. The overall exit limit there on the 320B, 189. The 320C goes up to 219. So this one being the B and C variant there, taking traits of both, you could get perhaps a maximum capacity of 219, of course, depending on how the seats were actually configured in the cabin area. Overall length, though, 152 feet 11 inches, as the box had said, with a wingspan on the B and C spec of 145 feet 9 inches. The total wing area, therefore, goes to 3,050 square feet, or 283 square meters. Overall height of the aircraft on the B variant is 241 feet 1 inch. The C variant slightly shorter at 40 feet 0 inches. So 42 feet 1 inch there on the 320B, 40 feet exactly on the 320C. Maximum takeoff weight, though, on the B and C variant, 333,600 pounds. The operating empty weight being 148,800 pounds on the B variant, with the C variant being a little bit lighter, 148,300 pounds. Fuel capacity on both B and C variants, 23,855 U.S. gallons. That is cool. The engines equipped on the B and C variant are the Pratt & Whitney JT3D-3-7s, as you would see here, and of course the box did say that as well. All of those engines individually generating between 18,000 and 19,000 pound-feet of thrust at sea level, and of course you can multiply that by 4 in order to get your total thrust output there. That was enough to get a cruising speed of 478 to 525 knots. That's 885 to 974 kilometers per hour. Overall range was 5,000 nautical miles in the B spec and 2,900 nautical miles on the C spec. And of course, that's also going to depend on payload, weather conditions, and things like that. Takeoff length required on the B and C variants, 10,000 feet of runway, or exactly 3 kilometers, and the landing distance required, 5,900 feet, or 1.8 kilometers on the B variant, or 6,200 feet on the C variant. That's 1.9 kilometers in terms of the runway length required for landing. Of course, the Boeing 707, it needs no introduction in terms of what it did for the airline industry. Boeing absolutely got it exactly right with the 707. The 707 was its first jet airliner, and, well, you can see the resemblance that the 707 still has today to basically all of the modern era jet airliners that have followed it, and even among other products of the Boeing line, you can see, generally speaking, that the fuselage shape and overall proportion is almost identical to the 737. Itself is a pretty old design at this point, but the 737 continues to be developed today, and you can see particularly along the nose area, as well as the line that you get with the vertical stabilizer joining up with the fuselage, you can see definitely that there are still very, very distinctive design traits from the 707 still being employed today in airliners that are being manufactured as we speak. So really, this was a very groundbreaking design of groundbreaking aircraft with a wonderful service record. Yes, this was definitely a paradigm shift in terms of the aviation sector, particularly in commercial aviation. And it's no coincidence at all that out of the 865 707s that were built, they definitely set an example for what the industry standards would become and ultimately still are to this day. With the aircraft rotating once again, we can start to take a look at some of the more macrocosmic details on this model. Now, remember, this model is 19 years old, and Gemini Jets, I believe, only started operations as Gemini Jets anyway in 1998. So, really, we're in the third year of Gemini Jets in terms of being in existence and being in the model aircraft business. So, some of the things on this model are very different from what we get today on more contemporary Gemini Jets models. And first of all, I think you'd agree that the quality of the printing has gotten a lot better in terms of the graphics on these models as time has gone on. And that's not to say that this is bad by any means. Everything is very crisp and clear. All of the title graphics are legible. The windows are all rendered nicely. The registration numbers on the wings as well as on the tail section of the aircraft, very nicely done. You can see the flag of the State of Israel on the vertical stabilizer. Very nicely done, nicely rendered. Everything is legible and obviously very recognizable. But some other things on this model in terms of the printing, I think they've just started to get better as time has gone on in terms of the inks that they have used and things like that, because everything looks good, but some of it seems to lack a little bit of the luster that you get on some of the newer models. But again, for what this is, being as old as it is, it's still a very fine effort. Also, I think just in general, the paints that Gemini Jets use on the undercoatings in terms of the colors of everything, I think that's also gotten better as time has gone on, particularly on the wings. I find that the wing colors on this one, obviously they're they're trying to go for an untreated bare metal approach on the engine nacelles and things like that, but I think that as time has gone on, they've just done a better and better job with all of this. The other major detail that's very different on this one versus newer models by Gemini Jets is the landing gear. The landing gear do not roll at all on this aircraft. Neither the mains nor the nose gear roll. They're just fixed in position, and it's all in plastic. The rubber tires over plastic wheel scheme is something that we see today, but we don't see on this model. So again, little details, little refinements that they have done as they have gotten better at making these models for all of us. And again, I can't really fault it for anything like that, because we have to judge this in the context of the time that it was produced, and being produced in 2001. Well, I think this is a fair effort given the age of the model. However, the other things that you can see, the trailing edges of the wings there with the shut lines for the slats, flaps, and spoilers, they're all rendered nicely. And the engine nacelles, to the extent that we can see them, very nicely done. And of course, we do have fan blade detail inside the engines there for our outer stage of the engine, the fan area, before we get into the interior surfaces of the engine with the compressor stages in there. So that's all well and good. The horizontal stabilizer, again, you can see the trim tabs there, as well as the shut lines for the elevators. That all looks good. Toward the tail section of the aircraft, you can see more LL graphics, as well as Boeing 707 emblazoned there just below the window line. So that looks good, and of course it's all still legible. You can also see detailing done for your overwing exits and your fore and aft exits as well on both sides of the aircraft, so that all looks good. And of course your cockpit area with the cockpit windows, nicely rendered there. The little eyebrow windows above the main windows, also done nicely. So again, I can't really fault this model for anything. It just is a little bit of an artifact of the times in which it was produced, but all in all, still very, very nicely done, I must say. Stopping our rotation now, and we'll take a closer look at the nose section of the aircraft. Here, of course, from the forward port side, you can see that we've got our cockpit windows rendered nicely with the little eyebrow windows. You can see the spot of black paint there right at the nose tip, covering the radar array in there. And then, of course, we start to get our liveried sheet line coming in from a roughly triangular cross-section before it then reaches its full expansion over the cabin window area. But obviously we have got our L1 door, boarding door there in the forward section of the fuselage, and then as we move aft you can see that we have two overwing exits there. Nice contrast in this livery between the white undercoat, if you will, and then we have got our blue cheat line, which then transitions into a black line as you go roughly to the wing root area on the fuselage. So all of that looks nice. Your overwing exits, as we mentioned, and then as we start to get aft, you can see that we have got another LL graphic there. It says Israel Airlines, and then just below that we have Boeing 707 in there as our aircraft type, as you would definitely expect to see. Our wing detail here, you can see on the wing root area we have got a representation of landing lights right there. They're not actual lensing or anything in there, it's just printed detail, but that's good. And then as we start to move along the leading edge of the wing, you can see that we have got our shut lines for our leading edge flaps there, and then we move out to our wingtip with the red strobe for the port side wing. We have got our engine nacelles right here. The engines on the 707 are probably the biggest departure from what we see nowadays on civil jets. These engines, really, they're turbo jets, and they have a very low bypass ratio, and they're very inefficient compared to the more modern engines. But this is what the 707 would have shipped with. A few 707s in later years, particularly in military service, were re-engined. If you remember last week when we took a look at the KC-135, that aircraft basically is a 707, but it's been re-engined to basically to get the designation to KC-135R. And those KC-135s would have had these engines or very similar engines on them initially as well, given that they are derived from the 707, but they've been re-engined, and obviously it demonstrates the versatility of the 707 airframe to be able to accept more modernized engines, and of course more modernization in other areas as well as time has gone on, particularly for military use. But in terms of civil service, the 707 for the most part still is running these engines today, albeit in very limited civil service that the the 707 is still in. I believe Saha Air from Iran was the last commercial carrier regularly to operate the 707. If you want to fly on a 707 today, though, Saha retired them somewhat recently. However, 707s are still flying limited cargo service as well as limited charter service, aside from the couple aircraft that are still flying in private operators. But for the most part, the 707 is now a relic consigned to museums, although there are still a few of them continuing to do their thing in a few places around the world. Very, very nice. As we remarked about with the aircraft's resemblance to the 737, I do like that shape of the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer there as it integrates with the aft section of the fuselage. That's good. The tail cone area as well. And as we remarked on the KC-135, you can see this topside antenna right there on the forward edge of the vertical stabilizer rather. That was on the KC-135, and it's on this civilian variant of the 707. Very, very nice. Also, if we move down again, you can see the overall family resemblance between the 707 and the 737. Of course, the 737 is still very much flying, it's still very much being produced today, and you can see, just take a look at the cockpit windows and the overall shape of the nose. That is 737 all day long, is it not? Yep, thank the 707 for that family resemblance. And again, this was the first commercial jet that Boeing ever made, and the fact that you can still find design archetypical statements in it still being used on modern aircraft, that really demonstrates just how good Boeing got it the first time out. Coming in a little bit more closely now on the nose of the 707. Zoom in here as much as our camera will allow before the focus starts to go crazy. I think we just reached that limit. Yes, indeed we did. We'll pull out slightly. We should get it back. Yep, there we go. So, nose section there on the 707, you can see generally the proportion of the nose, again, very similar to the 737. The cockpit windows there, I do like very minuscule little eyebrow windows above the main cockpit windows. That look good. I also like the livery cheat lines there, converging there just behind the nose tip with the black paint there over the radar dome. That looks good, and they both look absolutely straight and level, so nicely matched up in terms of the printing and making sure everything was measured correctly. So that's good. You can also see the nose landing gear here. Very stubby nose gear with perhaps a slightly larger than scale correct strut over the wheel assembly, but still looking very, very good. Of course, the landing gear, as we remarked before, do not roll, but probably par for the course with these relatively early era Gemini Jets models here. Moving outboard here on the right wing, you can see that we do have the fan blade detail inside the engine nacelles. Very small details, of course. I would estimate the diameter of those engine intake sides, anyway, to be about 3 millimeters. They're very small, but you do have fan blade detail in there. It's just about discernible. Very cool to see that painstaking amount of detail made here. And of course, on the left wing, you have got a reiteration of the same with the two other engines on the other side of the aircraft. Very nicely done. Overall proportion of the empennage here, when viewed from the front, you can see the general disposition of all of that. Looks good. We can set our depth of focus there for the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. That all looks very, very nice. And again, basically no qualms from me in terms of the general proportions or anything else on this aircraft. Looks very nicely put together, even though it is 19 years old. Really cool. Looking from the starboard side on the 707, again, very similar to what we saw already from our little three-quarter shot from the front port side, but there you go. Moving toward the nose, there it is. There's really that shape of the nose that's so reminiscent of ultimately the 737. I like that a lot. Obviously, you've got your LL title graphics there with your Latin and Hebrew script. Very nicely done, and I like the contrast there between the dark blue and the gold paint there used for the Latin and Hebrew scripts, respectively. There's your R1 door, and then a little cargo hatch down below, and your cabin windows there. Very nice. There are no window shades or anything like that rendered here, unlike some of the other models that we've gotten later, but you do have all of the cabin windows very nicely rendered here from fore to aft. That's cool. And your leading edge of the starboard wing with your green strobe on the wingtip. That looks good. And then your engine nacelles looking very nice right through there, roughly middle of frame. Also, you can see that the engine nacelles, they also extend above the upper surface of the wing a little bit. These are aerodynamic fairings, I'm assuming, just designed to create a little bit better flow dynamics across the leading edge of the wing. Seems to work nicely. And then, of course, moving your rears to the tail cone area, there you can see our registration for X-Ray Alpha Yankee Sierra. That's cool. At least I think it's Alpha Yankee Sierra. Let me double check that. Nope, Alpha Tango Sierra, yes. A little bit difficult to read there, but yeah, just about legible. Yep, for X-Ray Alpha Tango Sierra, yes. You can also see here we have got graphics Boeing 707 and El Al, and then the Hebrew script here says Israeli Airlines, I believe. And then moving up toward our empennage and vertical stabilizer. There it is, clear as you like. Horizontal stabilizer swept back a bit as you'd expect. Nice leading edge detail there, as well as wingtip detail. And then, of course, you have got the vertical stabilizer with the rudder shut line, and then the antenna up at the top, and the flag of the State of Israel there right at the very top of our facing surface here. Obviously, El Al being the flag carrier for Israel, you'd want that displayed prominently. Therefore, there it is. Very nice. Another thing that you don't see on this model versus some of the more recent ones, you don't see any external antenna details with the exception of the vertical stabilizer there. There are no little sharklet antennas or anything like that. 707 really wouldn't have had those anyway because they weren't really being used at that time that the 707 would have been flying in widespread commercial service, but that is a detail that Gemini Jets have later added to subsequent models as they've started to become more and more commonplace. But other than that, still definitely passes for a very decently done model. Coming in from the rear of the 707, coming in. There we go. There's your tail cone area. You can see where the wings on the horizontal stabilizer area start to come into the fuselage, so that's good, but they look like they're mounted nicely. You can see some shut line detail as well on the horizontal stabilizers. Tail cone area looks good. No real detail to talk about there, but it's nicely rendered. And then the trailing edges of the wings as well as your main landing gear visible there. There are your shut lines on the trailing edges, the upper surfaces of the wings, with your slats, flaps, and spoilers. Very nice. And then the exhaust sides of the engines. You can see that we do have a rendering of an exhaust outlet on the engines. And remember, very low bypass, so you don't have any sort of pass-through detail visible here. And even if these engines were higher bypass, and in this very small form factor, it wouldn't be visible anyway here at 1/400 scale, because those engine nacelles are very tiny. But they are there, and for the size constraints that we've got, they're rendered quite nicely. Of course, the trailing edge of the wing tip, very nice. You can see the control surfaces. In addition to the flaps, you can also see the aileron detail there on the trailing edges of the wing. Very, very nicely done on both sides. No issues with any of that. Definitely a very competently done model here back in 2001 by Gemini Jets. Very good. And from the port side of the aircraft, just for the sake of continuity, we have seen most of these details already. But, yep, there it is. There is the nose section of the aircraft right there. Nice. You don't have the cargo hatches here visible on the port side. We did have a couple on the starboard side, but the port side pretty quiet in that regard. You can see there the strut of the nose landing gear, rendered pretty nicely, I've got to say. And then moving arrears toward midships, the two overwing exits, our engine nacelles, the pods to which the nacelles are mounted, and then there we go toward the tail section of the aircraft. Boeing 707 for X-Ray Alpha Tango Sierra, El Al, Israel Airlines. There we go in Latin script. So cool, and that confirms what the Hebrew script says on the starboard side. Over the top, there we go. Empennage, vertical and horizontal stabilizers, looking nice. And again, I've just got to say, good renderings of all the details here visible. Once again, looks absolutely marvelous. Great job here by Gemini Jets all those 19 years ago. This is definitely still a good one, I've got to say. And It really does show that, much like Boeing did with the actual 707, Gemini Jets definitely got a lot of things right pretty much first time out in making this model and making a few others that I've also seen from around this era of their production history. So very nicely done. And to close this out, we'll take a quick look freehand here at some of the details that perhaps we couldn't quite get close in enough to see with the camera mounted on the tripod, but there you go. Top edges of the wings, very nicely done. You can see that we have got that matte area toward the center line of the wing, and then things move back to a more high gloss finish there as we go to the outboard edges of the wing. Over on the starboard wing, you can see we have got our registration reiterated here for X-Ray Alpha Tango Sierra, and then you can see the upper sides of the engine nacelles on both of the wings. And again, that's just integrating them into that leading edge profile a little bit better. Very cool. There are the eyebrow windows over the cockpit that I was talking about earlier. You can see them a little bit more clearly, I hope. And then toward the tail area, there is a strobe mounted just to rears of midships. That's just a printed detail. There's no actual bezel or anything there. And then all Israel Airlines Boeing 707 with our registration again, just a rears of the aft door. Very nice, and then good empennage detail as well. Looks really, really slick, I gotta say, for being a reasonably old model. In fact, I think this is the oldest 1400 model that I have. It's not the oldest in terms of the order of me acquiring it, but definitely the oldest in terms of when it was actually made. But still, they've done a nice job on this one all of those years ago. In fact, it's fairly likely that some of you watching this weren't even born when this model was made, so that's actually kind of a brain blast for me. But yeah, not bad at all. I quite like it, and of course, if you're going to be collecting these models, I think you've got to have at least one 707 in the collection. Definitely a great aircraft, and this model by Gemini Jets, certainly it is a good one despite its age. So there it was in 1/400th scale by Gemini Jets, the Boeing 707. This model is 19 years old, being a 2001 release, so some of the things that we highlighted here are a little bit different from the products that Gemini Jets, and other manufacturers for that matter, will be putting out in more contemporary times. But it still, in my opinion, passes as a very nicely done scale model. And of course, its subject matter is one of the most groundbreaking and respected civil jets ever, the great Boeing 707. If you can find this one, and of course, being so old, I am sure that there's basically no new stock remaining anywhere, but if you can find one of these, just be aware that it is a little bit different in terms of the overall, not necessarily production quality, but production philosophy than what you'll get on more contemporarily made models. You don't have rolling landing gear, you don't have rubber tires, so things like that, if they're going to bother you, stay away from this one. But if those things don't bother you and you're just looking for a 707, this mold from 2001 by Gemini Jets is very nicely done. It's nicely constructed. It is pretty much all die cast. The only plastic parts on here are the engine nacelles and the landing gear. Everything else is in die cast, and of course it has held up very nicely. Of course, it has been boxed kept, and I actually did manage to get this one from a store as a first-time distribution, so it was not a second-hand model. It had been sitting on a store shelf for 19 years before I decided to pull the trigger on it. But odds are, if you're going to find one of these nowadays, it is going to be secondhand. Just take a look through the listing and ask the seller questions if you must, but really, it's a nicely put together model. The only concerns I would have about it would be the paint, I guess, just considering the age. If it was kept in a changeable environment in terms of temperature or humidity, you might get some paint flaking, but this one is absolutely fine, and really, I think it's probably going to be just fine for another 19 years or so. So if you are in the market for a 707 in 1/400 scale, this is definitely one to consider. I'm not sure about the other manufacturers who have made or who will make a 707, but the Gemini Jets version, definitely, it is very nice. If you have any of the more recent Gemini Max releases of the KC-135, for example, that one is also a very good mold, and of course, it is basically exactly the same aircraft as the 707, just a military variant thereof. However, very nicely done here by Gemini Jets. Definitely, I could recommend this one. Until next time, though, I do hope that you've all enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.